American fighter squadrons, freshly reinforced after the grueling campaigns in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, were preparing for what would become one of the most daring series of strikes against Japanese air power. Among these units, the 5th Air Force, operating primarily from forward airfields in New Guinea and later the Philippines, had earned a reputation for precision, aggressiveness, and relentless pursuit of enemy aircraft and installations. Pilots like Major Paul Wurtsmith, Colonel Gerald Johnson, and the daring crews of the 49th Fighter Group were beginning to demonstrate that the tide of the air war in the Pacific was about to change. These men had flown countless missions in the early months of the war, often against impossible odds. Japanese Zeros, renowned for their maneuverability, had dominated the skies early on. The American P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt were fast, heavily armed, and resilient, but learning to use these advantages against the nimble Japanese fighters required a combination of cunning tactics, patience, and the unshakable belief that no mission was impossible. The pilots quickly developed new combat doctrines, boom and zoom attacks, coordinated squadron formations, and disciplined engagement rules that prioritized hitting the enemy hard and retreating before the Japanese could exploit weaknesses. The turning point came during the campaign for the Solomon Islands. Airfields at Rabaul and surrounding islands were heavily defended, but they were vital to Japan's control of the South Pacific. In late 1943, the 5th Air Force, supported by the Navy's carrier-based aircraft, began a series of raids designed to destroy enemy aircraft on the ground, disrupt supply lines, and weaken Japanese air superiority. One particularly significant mission involved a coordinated strike against airfields on New Britain, targeting the Japanese 11th Air Fleet's bases. American intelligence had carefully tracked Japanese aircraft movements, noting patterns in patrol rotations, refueling schedules, and defensive positions. Major Wurtsmith's leadership ensured that pilots understood that success depended not just on speed and firepower, but on timing and coordination. When the squadron launched, P-38s and P-40s roared into the sky, slicing through the dawn mist with the precision of a well-oiled machine. From above, the Japanese defenders saw only a relentless wave of American fighters descending upon them, and many were caught completely off guard. The results were immediate and devastating. Aircraft on the ground were strafed, fuel dumps exploded, and hangars were left in flames. Japanese pilots scrambled to intercept, but the American squadrons had already begun executing their carefully rehearsed exit strategies. The Zeros that tried to engage were met with well-aimed bursts from concentrated 50 caliber machine guns and the superior diving speed of the P-38s. Pilots reported seeing formations of Zeros break apart as they tried to respond to the sudden, overwhelming pressure. Among those missions, one flight stood out. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson led a small flight of P-38s on a deep strike targeting Rabaul's primary airfield. Flying at high altitude to avoid early detection, the squadron descended upon the unsuspecting Japanese fighters and support crews. Johnson's flight had studied maps meticulously and coordinated with intelligence officers to strike key aircraft dispersal areas. As they entered the attack zone, bursts of tracer rounds illuminated the air and the sound of metal tearing through aircraft wings filled the sky. Within minutes, the airfield was in chaos, smoke rising in thick columns that could be seen for miles. The psychological effect on the Japanese was profound. Pilots, ground crews, and commanders alike were stunned by the suddenness and effectiveness of the raids. What they had once considered untouchable bases now seemed vulnerable, and morale began to waver. American pilots, meanwhile, recognized that these missions were more than just tactical victories. They were symbolic demonstrations that Japanese air power could be challenged, and that American airmen could strike decisively even deep within enemy territory. The success of the 5th Air Force in these early raids was not accidental. It was the result of meticulous planning, rigorous training, and the unique qualities of the aircraft and crews. The P-38, with its twin engines, long range, and heavy armament, allowed pilots to engage Japanese aircraft at a distance, strike with overwhelming force, and return safely to base. Tactics such as using cloud cover for surprise approaches, coordinating attacks with multiple squadrons, and employing diversionary flights kept the Japanese defenders off balance. Every pilot who flew these missions understood the risks. The Pacific skies were not forgiving, and a single miscalculation could be fatal. Fuel management, navigation over featureless ocean expanses, enemy fire, and mechanical failures were constant threats. Despite this, American pilots pressed on, motivated by the knowledge that each successful strike not only weakened Japan's military position, but also safeguarded the lives of soldiers fighting on the ground and sailors at sea. By late 1943, the Ghost Squadron, as it would later be called by both allies and enemies, had begun to earn a reputation for audacity and effectiveness. Stories of their missions spread among American forces and were even noted in intercepted Japanese communications, though often without full recognition of the scale of the operations. The squadron's ability to strike deep, inflict significant damage, and withdraw without catastrophic losses made them a formidable presence in the Pacific and a constant thorn in the side of the Japanese command. The operational tempo continued to rise. Missions that had once seemed impossible were now executed with precision and confidence. Pilots adapted to enemy tactics in real time, sharing lessons learned and adjusting flight formations to maximize firepower and minimize exposure. The combination of intelligence preparation, advanced aircraft, and highly motivated pilots created an environment where Japanese air superiority was no longer guaranteed. In retrospect, the campaign of late 1943 in the South Pacific represents a turning point in the air war. The Ghost Squadron's early operations demonstrated that with skill, planning, and daring, American pilots could challenge and dismantle entrenched enemy positions. The raids not only destroyed aircraft and infrastructure, but also shattered the psychological confidence that the Japanese military had relied upon. American forces were proving that their pilots could fight not just to defend territory, but to take the fight to the enemy's doorstep, shaping the course of the war in the Pacific. As the sun set on the smoke-filled islands, the returning pilots were greeted not just with applause and relief, but with a growing recognition that their efforts were changing the nature of aerial warfare. Each mission built upon the last, a chain of success that would culminate in the eventual dominance of the skies over the Pacific. The Ghost Squadron was no longer just a group of daring pilots, it had become a symbol of American ingenuity, courage, and determination, an unstoppable force reshaping the war from the clouds above. The Ghost Squadron's impact continued to escalate as 1944 dawned, with American forces pressing the advantage across the vast expanse of the Pacific. After months of grueling campaigns in the Solomons and New Guinea, the squadron was ready to take the fight closer to the Japanese homeland. Bases in the Central and Western Pacific, including those in the Admiralty Islands and the newly captured airfields in the Philippines, became springboards for increasingly bold and far-reaching missions. The pilots knew that every sortie carried enormous risk, yet the momentum they had built was unstoppable. The strategy had shifted from merely defending Allied positions to aggressively targeting Japanese airfields, supply lines, and naval assets. The Ghost Squadron, flying P-38 Lightnings and P-47 Thunderbolts, focused on long-range missions designed to cripple Japan's ability to project power across the Pacific. Intelligence had identified clusters of Japanese aircraft, many of which had survived previous raids, but were now vulnerable due to stretched resources and dwindling experienced pilots. The American airmen exploited this, using superior speed, firepower, and coordinated attack strategies to catch the enemy off guard. One notable mission involved a strike against airfields in western New Guinea, where Japanese forces had consolidated fighter units to resist the advancing Allies. Major Paul Wurtsmith, now leading the operation, briefed his pilots in painstaking detail, emphasizing timing, flight paths, and target prioritization. Every maneuver was calculated to maximize impact and minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. As dawn broke, the squadron roared into the sky, engines screaming and machine guns ready, descending upon the unsuspecting Japanese positions. The attacks were swift and devastating. Aircraft lined up on the runways were obliterated before crews could respond. Hangars were reduced to rubble, and fuel depots ignited in massive, fiery explosions. Japanese pilots scrambled to mount a defense, but the Ghost Squadron's superior altitude and dive capabilities gave them a lethal advantage. One by one, enemy formations broke under the relentless assault. Observers on the ground later described the scene as apocalyptic, with smoke rising in dense clouds that blotched out the sun. Psychologically, the raids had a profound effect on Japanese forces. The illusion of invulnerability that had characterized their early successes in the Pacific was shattered. Pilots, ground crews, and commanders alike realized that American airmen could strike decisively and unpredictably, turning even fortified airfields into deadly traps. The Ghost Squadron's reputation grew not only among Allied forces, but within Japanese intelligence circles, where intercepted communications began to refer to them as an unstoppable, almost mythical force. As 1944 progressed, the squadron's operations extended to the Philippines, supporting General MacArthur's campaign to liberate the islands. Missions now involved long-range strikes over hostile territory, often in coordination with bomber groups targeting strategic infrastructure. Every sortie required meticulous navigation across hundreds of miles of ocean, careful fuel management, and precise coordination with supporting aircraft. Pilots pushed their machines to the limit, often returning from missions with significant damage sustained from both enemy fire and the strain of prolonged high-speed flight. During the campaign over Leyte and Luzon, the Ghost Squadron executed missions that would become legendary in aerial warfare history. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson led a formation deep into northern Luzon, targeting airfields that had been rebuilt after earlier attacks. The P-38s, exploiting their twin engines and high-altitude performance, dove upon enemy aircraft with pinpoint accuracy. Ground crews tried desperately to scramble planes, but the speed and coordination of the American attack left little chance for effective resistance. Aircraft that had survived previous raids were destroyed, and Japanese anti-aircraft positions were neutralized with well-timed strafing runs. The cumulative effect of these operations was staggering. Japanese air power in the Western Pacific was rapidly diminished, with losses that could not be easily replaced due to the limited availability of trained pilots and industrial constraints back home. The Ghost Squadron's relentless pressure disrupted enemy supply lines, reduced defensive capabilities, and created a psychological climate of fear and uncertainty. Japanese pilots who survived encounters with the squadron reported their experiences with a mixture of awe and terror, describing American fighters as precise, ruthless, and almost omnipresent. The squadron's success was not just a matter of firepower. It was also the result of innovation in tactics and technology. Pilots adapted to Japanese maneuvers, employing boom and zoom attacks, high-speed slashing passes, and coordinated multi-squadron formations that overwhelmed defenders. They learned to exploit the weaknesses of the Zero and other Japanese aircraft, using diving speed and superior armament to engage on favorable terms. The integration of intelligence, weather analysis, and radio coordination allowed for increasingly sophisticated operations, turning what had once been high-risk raids into highly effective strikes. By mid-1944, the Ghost Squadron had established a near-mythical status. Tales of their missions spread across the Pacific theater, bolstering morale among Allied forces and signaling to the Japanese that the balance of air power had shifted irrevocably. Each successful mission reinforced the principle that American airmen could strike decisively even against heavily defended positions, and that the Japanese air threat was no longer insurmountable. The liberation of the Philippines marked a critical phase in the squadron's campaign. Operations over Luzon and Mindoro demonstrated the strategic value of air superiority. The Ghost Squadron's relentless pressure not only destroyed aircraft on the ground, but also supported ground forces by targeting supply lines, troop concentrations, and defensive positions. The synergy between air and ground operations showcased the evolving doctrine of American combined arms warfare, with the squadron at the forefront of these innovations.
As 1944 drew to a close, the Ghost Squadron had firmly established itself as a symbol of American determination, skill, and ingenuity. Pilots who had once flown cautiously over enemy territory now executed complex missions with confidence, knowing that their training, teamwork, and superior aircraft gave them a decisive edge. Japanese forces were forced to retreat, regroup, and reconsider their strategies in the face of an enemy that seemed capable of striking anywhere, anytime. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the squadron's achievements demonstrated that air power could decisively shape the outcome of campaigns. By neutralizing Japanese air assets, supporting amphibious operations, and maintaining relentless pressure on enemy supply lines, the Ghost Squadron helped pave the way for major victories across the theater. Their courage, skill, and innovation not only saved countless lives, but also contributed directly to the eventual defeat of Japan. As the sun set on another mission, returning pilots reflected on their role in this unprecedented campaign. Each sortie, each strafing run, each calculated maneuver had brought them closer to breaking the back of Japanese air power. The Ghost Squadron was no longer just a unit. It was a living testament to the ingenuity, bravery, and relentless spirit of American airmen. Their story would be remembered not only for the victories they achieved, but for the audacity and determination that defined every flight, every engagement, and every moment in the skies over the Pacific. The legacy of the Ghost Squadron endured long after the last mission. Their efforts exemplified the combination of intelligence, skill, and daring that became the hallmark of American air operations in World War II. By striking at the heart of Japan's air capabilities, they changed the course of the war, leaving an indelible mark on history and demonstrating that courage, preparation, and relentless pursuit of the mission could overcome even the most formidable of enemies.